Okay, this may not be a big deal for you guys, but trust me, it's not raining. It's not even windy. Okay, so I need to make the absolute most of this lovely day because we are, again, forecast for a boatload of rain. But today, first things first, we are getting into some serious garden planning. So this is not my first year growing veg, but it is my first year trying to grow the vast majority of our fruit and veg for the whole year. So while in past life I would just grow a bit of whatever I fancied and that was just supplement, great. This year I have to try and really think about what we want, how we're going to use it, how I'm going to store it, and therefore how much of each thing I need to grow. That's what I'm trying to get really nailed down this week. So I've been a little bit airy-fairy with all my garden planning so far. It's just been like starting loads of seeds and having grand ideas about how it's all going to look when it's done. But I'm missing that bit in the middle. So at the moment we've got loads of seedlings on the go. They'll be coming outside fairly soon. So I really need to have a proper think about where everything's going to go and how I'm going to fit it in and what's the best use of the space. So if you've watched any of my other videos, then you probably know that I'm doing a separate annual vegetable garden and a perennial food forest style area. These aren't completely separate ideas, but I'm just trying to keep them separate in my head for planning purposes. But I am going to be taking that permaculture mindset into my annual garden. So we are not going to have, perfect market rows of the exact same crop. I'm going to be doing lots of polyculturing, a lot of succession planting, and there will be a lot of other things besides just pure veg out in that garden. While I am in love with that idea, it also is going to take a little bit of planning. Otherwise, I'm going to end up filling up the garden with flowers and other things and then not have space for my planned veggies. So I really do need to think about how many of each plant I'm actually going to need. I could talk about that forever because it's so complicated. It's so difficult to know how many, tomato plants your household is actually going to need, because I've never grown all my own tomatoes before. I've grown all my fresh eating in summer tomatoes, but I've not grown all of my tinned tomatoes, all of my tomato products, and that's what I'm trying to do this year. So I've had to sit down and kind of best guess it a little bit, and I will just keep records and then decide after a full year of trying to go through these supplies what works well, what doesn't, what I need more of, what I might need less of. So I have stuck a rough number on every kind of plant that I'm growing, just so that I could do a proper calculation. I've taken the number of plants that I'm going to be growing, the maximum suggested spacing for those plants. I've gone maximum because, as I say, I'm going to be polyculturing. I've not accounted for those extra bits and bobs that are going to go around my veg. I've only accounted for the space that the veg is going to take. I am planning to put some flowers, some beneficial herbs, things like that in that space, but I've not accounted for those. So I've gone with the maximum recommended spacing for my vegetable plants, knowing that they will get interplanted with other things. So I've basically written all of that down, worked out roughly, based on that, the amount of in-ground bed space that I actually need in order to grow all of the things I want to grow. I also did a quick walk around and measured out the beds that I've already got in place, to work out how much space I've already got ready to be planted, so that I can see the difference between those two things and make sure that by the time I actually need that bed space, it's there and ready. Because I've got time now while everything is just seedling stage, I won't have time later on in the season when everything's kicking off. Do you notice my new Welsh dresser? Isn't it beautiful? So I picked this up secondhand off Marketplace, and it was bargain, and I am absolutely in love with it. It's just a little upgrade for my potting shed, but anyway, back to it. So I did a really rough, drawn out map of my veggie gardens as they are at the moment, the beds that we've got in. The only thing that's planted is still the garlic that runs in here, but I plan to extend that bed all the way down. And then some of these beds exist, some of them don't, but this is my plan as it stands. So I wanted to calculate how much space I've got planned, and how likely it is that that's going to be enough space. So then I made a note of all of the plants, all the veggies I'm planning to grow, a rough guess at the number of each, the maximum spacing for those, and therefore the amount of space they're going to take. And that came to 128 square meters. And once I calculated the size of these beds, that came to 124 square meters. So actually, we're not that far off. Okay, so those numbers are actually quite close, which is reassuring in that I don't have to suddenly go and, panic, put in loads of extra bed space. I still will probably need a bit more space because I'm sure there's some things I haven't accounted for, but it's reassuring that I can just do that as I have time. And if a time comes where I've run out of space, I need an extra bed or two, I don't mind doing that as part of the season. I just didn't want to have a sudden moment where I suddenly needed rows and rows and rows of more space. So that's good. Oh, hey bud. So things to also consider, as I said, I've taken into account the maximum recommended spacing for the vegetable plants to give myself a bit of wiggle room for herbs and flowers and other little bits. Do you mind that I'm going to companion plant alongside those vegetables? I also haven't taken into consideration any kind of succession sowing for the early, you're inside my mouth. For the early things that will be done halfway through the season, I'll be able to use that space for something else. I've not taken that into account, so that will all be extra space. Anything that I will succession sow, I've taken the total number of those plants I'm going to sow, but then obviously they will be using space at different times as I succession sow. I've also not taken into consideration, there's a few things that I've done that I've started from seed that are a little bit experimental and not part of my let's feed ourselves with vegetables for the year plan. And that's things like chickpeas and quinoa. I wanted to give those a go on a relatively small scale just to see how feasible it is for me to grow those things. So I need to have a little bit of a thought about where they're going to go. So there's some extra little bits. This is not a perfect plan, but it is reassuring that I'm about on track with the bed space that I was expecting that I was going to need. So that's promising. When I'm looking at how many of each plant I'm growing, some of the numbers might look a little bit crazy because I've got a relatively small patch of, say, salad and things like that, and ridiculous numbers of beans and tomatoes, but that is because I am growing to store. Whereas the salad, I'm just going to have a patch that I cut and come again. I'm not a huge salad eater. It's nice to have, especially in the summer, but I'm not going to go nuts. I can't store it. We just have to eat it or lose it. Whereas, give me a little windbag. Whereas, things like beans, I'm growing specifically to dry and store. Tomatoes, I'm growing specifically to can up and have on the shelves through winter. So if some of the numbers look a little bit crazy, that's why. You're beautiful. Now my next plan is to consider, I say I'm going to companion plant, but I need to have a real plan as to what's going with what, because everything goes out at a different time. I'm about to put an awful lot of broad beans out there today. And I don't want to monocrop. I am going to be being distracted. I am going to be doing polycultures. So I think what's going to go in with those broad beans, or nothing that's ready to go out just yet. But if something is going to go with them, then I need to leave the space for that. So I need to have a loose plan on how I'm going to organise those beds and what's going to go together. So I can start planting stuff out with confidence, knowing that I'm leaving space for the things that are going to join that bed later in the season. Okay. I've also just realised that I've forgotten potatoes. So I've got no space allocated for that. So that's also on the list. So what we're doing today is finalising the plans for these polyculture beds to make sure that I know what's going where and to make sure that it's feasible, that I've got the right number of things on the go, and start planning out anything that can be direct sown. We've just had clocks change, so that is it now. I'm in full gardening, spring is here mode. I'm going to get some stuff direct sown while I've got a reasonable day outside to do it. I'm fairly confident that we're done with frost where I am now. We don't get frost very often. I think we had 2 or 3 light frosts this whole winter. So the odds of me getting a frost now is really, really, really low. But that being said, I'm not going to go throwing my tomatoes out or anything like that just yet. It's still not warm enough for anything that likes it warm. The days are not particularly long enough. Obviously, hopefully that will all be changing now. But it is time for me to start getting some stuff direct sown. If you've been watching my videos, you know that I have a bit of a space issue inside. I'm starting most of my seeds in my porch and on windowsills, and in a couple of cold frames that I've got here, and space is tight. So anything that can start being direct sown at this point, it's got to happen. So today the broad beans are actually going to go out. Then we are going to take stock of what we've got seed wise. I reckon the onions can also go out today. they're going in different beds, just FYI. I've got loose plans for my companion planted beds. I want to just confirm that, find little bits of research while I go in and have a cup of tea and get the puppy up. Then I'm going to get out there and actually get planting some stuff outside in the ground in North Wales at the end of March. Pretty happy. Okay, very quickly before we head out there, let me talk you through my plans. Now, I'm starting with you'll see it in a second when we go out there, but we're starting with this square bit because these are the beds that I put in first. They're no dig beds, so they've been in all winter, so they've had plenty of time for everything to die back underneath, the grass to die back, and they're quite well edged. So this is where I'm going to start. The broad beans are going out today. My plan is to start down in this corner because this here is the edge of our land. There's a nice established hedgerow here, and while it's still wintry, we're getting a lot of wind, and we're up a slight slope in this direction. So this side is still catching a fair amount of wind, whereas down here it's quite nicely sheltered from this hedgerow. So that's why I'm going to pop the broad beans down here for now, because I think they get just about enough shelter. So alongside my broad beans, I am going to pop some lettuce that have germinated in the cold frame. I think it's probably about time that they can go out now. I'm going to put some space for some potatoes in here. I'm also going to leave some space for some nasturtiums in here, and potentially my celery is also going to be companion planted in this same area. Now these little triangular beds that are inside this square bed area, I plan to put herbs in, and any sort of companion planting that I don't necessarily want to go directly in with the veg, just because they're either going to get too big or they won't be so easy to manage the veg around. They're going to go into these. So in this one, next to these broad beans, I'm planning to put a catmint and some borage and potentially a rosemary in there. So that's my plan today. I also have some onions ready to go out, so they don't want to go with broad beans. They do not get along. So I think I'm going to pop those up here. They're really small and close to the ground at the moment, so I'm hopeful that they will just be able to manage. I can always throw something along here just to create a little windbreak for them at this point. And I'm also going to direct sow some carrots. And then I'll leave space in this area to pop some tomatoes that will then also come down this row here. This is north, and we're running down the slope in this direction. That's my plan for today. Now, I don't have a plan for every single bit. This is where the garlic is, just to orientate you. And this is the hedgerow. I don't have plans for every single bit of bed, but now knowing that I've got a reasonable amount of space for what I've got planned, I'm just going to go ahead and start getting stuff in, and then hopefully it will all just kind of start to make sense as I start putting things out. So broad beans going in today with some bits around those. Onions are going in today because they're ready to go out. That's going to clear some space in my cold frames so that I can move some things that are struggling a little bit on the windowsills where they're not quite getting enough light, and they can go out in the cold frames. Plan. It's getting milder now, so I'm hopeful that I can pop some of the things that are currently in the porch out into the cold frames, and then the things that are on the windowsills inside out into the porch. And then we're slowly hardening off those things and clearing up more space inside to get more things started. Let's go. Okay, so I'm going to gather up all of the plants that we're going to get out in the field, all the little bits and bobs that I need. I'm going to pack it all up in the trolley, and then we're going to get out in the field and get it all planted. We have got our perpetual spinach. I've never grown it before, but it's going outside today, so we will see how it does. And if we come outside, we've got a puppy. Good boy. You're going to sit down. Sit down. Sit. Oh, good boy. Right, and here we've got some peas. They're ready. They're going out today. We've got 2 different kinds of onions. They're going out today. And then over here, we've got some broad beans. These are Sutton Dwarf. These are Claudia Aquadulce. They're all going out today. And I've also got some seeds that we're going to direct sow out there of broad beans as well. And they are going out here. Oh my gosh, it is a beautiful day. So a few days ago I came out and I popped this net tunnel up and direct sowed a couple of broad beans because I know that we have a problem with birds and rodents, as that is how I lost the vast majority of my tulip bulbs in the autumn. So I thought I'd do a little experiment and I'd come out here and direct sow some broad beans. And I've just discovered that there is no trace of them, so that has nipped my direct sowing of broad beans plan in the bud. But never mind, we'll pop in these started plants and start some more in pots. So these are the Sutton Dwarf broad beans going in first. I'm spacing them about 45 centimetres apart, which is a foot and a half, which is quite generous, but as I say, I'm leaving space for companion plants to come in around these. There's a layer of wood shavings and grass clippings on top of this bed, just as mulch, so that's why I'm breaking through the trowel. These are no dig beds that we put in back in November. So they've had a good chance to break down and mix underneath. Next, I've decided to pull up this net tunnel that I put in. My original plan was to direct sow some broad beans under this to protect them from being eaten straight out of the ground, but my experiment showed that's not going to work, so I will repurpose this net for something else. There is a significant dock under here. The dock is just coming through my no-dig beds, so I accept that I'm going to have to go through and dig those out when I want to plant things in. There's also some nettles and things, so I'm just clearing out those before we go ahead and plant in here. So I'm trying to clear out as much of the dock root as I can and those nettles that are just crisscrossing in every inch of some of these beds. There's also some thistles in here, so I'm pulling those out as well. I'm hopeful that the weed pressure will become easier to manage as time goes on. Obviously there's nothing in these beds at the moment, so it is inevitable that the weeds are going to come in. So hopefully once they're all planted up, it will become a much easier job to keep on top of the weeding. These are the Claudia Aquados broad beans that are now going in. As you can see, they vary quite a lot in size, but it doesn't really matter. As I say, they weren't sown into pots because they needed protection from the weather or anything like that. It was just so that they weren't eaten directly out of the ground. So I popped back into the stables and grabbed a few bamboo canes so that I could make a little support network for these peas to go out. I've just tied them together at the top to make a little teepee, and then I'm just popping 3 peas at the base of each of these canes, and I'll add some string around these as the peas grow if they need something else to grow onto. These are a combination of Ambassador and Green Shaft pea varieties going in here. It's the last of the Ambassador pea seeds that I bought a few years ago, and the Green Shaft are new for this year, so it'll be good to see them side by side and see how they go. I've also got some sugar snap peas to go in. The variety on those is Delicate with a K and 2 T's. I'm not sure how many peas are sown in total this year. I do like to grow enough to pop some in the freezer, but they never really seem to make it that far. But I do plan to succession sow peas throughout the season. So now moving on to the onions. I'm just popping a layer of compost over the top of this bed for me to plant directly into. If you haven't watched my video where I started these onion seeds, I explain in there how I'm following the direction of Charles Dowding in his multi-sown onions video. The idea being that the onions are sown about 5 or 6 seeds per module, then planted out into beds. And then as the season goes on, we can harvest some from each clump of spring onions and then allow the rest to go on and bulb up, and then harvest those later as a proper bulb onion. So here's my old-fashioned dibber by that onion stick. I'm just making the holes for these onions to go in. I'm being quite generous with the spacing, as I said before, just to leave space for anything I want a companion plant alongside these onions. And then it's literally just a matter of dropping each of these multi-sown onion modules into the holes, and I'll leave them to it for a bit. Just a quick voiceover to point out the majesty of that time-lapsing worm. So it's the next day. Yesterday I said categorically that I didn't think we'd get another frost, and what did I wake up to? I just can't really believe it, but we were forecast for 5 degrees above freezing overnight, lows of 5, and I woke up to frost this morning, so there you go. And that being said, it's a glorious day and it's 10 degrees outside again today, so it really is all over the bloody place here. But because it's 10 degrees, I've got some of the tomatoes, and over here some of the brassicas, all outside getting a bit of sun because, you know, they're not getting a lot in the porch at the moment. So, crazy stuff. But that's why we don't count our chickens. So I did have a quick check out there for everything that we put in yesterday. After the frost, everything's fine, which I expected it to be. It's onions, peas, broad beans, spinach. None of those things should have a trouble with a very light frost, and everything is fine. I said yesterday that I was going to direct sow some broad beans, and I remembered that last week I popped a few in direct sown under that net that you saw in the video, just to see whether or not that would stop them getting eaten out of the ground. Because when I planted my spring bulbs in the autumn last year, they got absolutely decimated, I assume by rodents of some kind. So I put the net over, I direct sowed a row of broad beans just to see if they would survive long enough to germinate out there, and there is no trace of them whatsoever. So I'm thinking, no, they won't survive on their own. So my plan to direct sow is gone. But that's fine. I'm just going to start another load in the pots, and then as soon as they're, just a couple of inches tall, I'll bung them outside. It's just to get them past that literal bean stage, because apparently that's just far too tempting to the rodents here, which is fine. So what I'll do is get another round of broad beans started, with the view that they will be going out in the next couple of weeks. So upcoming jobs out there is going to be, brassica is going to be ready to go out soon, so I need to get my brassica cage up and running. Okay, so that is another 16 broad beans sown. I put 20 plants out yesterday, so I think that's probably it for my broad beans. I might start a couple of plants every month or so and just see how they do over the summer, because I'm not really sure how they'll do here, just for a bit of fresh eating. But I think they'll probably do. We're only a household of 2, so still quite a lot of broad bean plants, but I like to eat them fresh, and I quite like having a bag in the freezer for every now and again over winter. That will be it for my broad beans now, and we'll move on to something else. Starting to fill up those beds, so feels really good. So those broad beans will probably be in there till early July time. So hopefully we have quite a long season here. I'll be able to get something else in after they're done. And as I said, around them in that bed, I am going to fill out the space with some companion plants. There's nothing ready to literally go out now other than the spinach that I put out yesterday. But I'm going to fill in that space as and when the seedlings that we've already got started are ready to go out. It won't be long before that bed is completely filled out with a nice polyculture of different edibles. So thank you very much for watching me. I can't really believe that anybody does. So thank you very much, and I will keep you up to date with how it goes. Cheers, guys.